Hey, so I am joined by Gemma today. Gemma and I work together at Legal and General, and I think it's been about 18 months since we've spoken, so I'm not up to date with what you're doing. Gemma, can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're up to now?
Absolutely. And it's so lovely to see you again, Alison. I'm so excited to get into what you're doing next. So, in terms of what I'm doing now, I'm currently at Lloyds Banking Group. I am head of culture innovation in the culture and leadership team. And what that involves is looking at how we surface challenges and problems in the organisation and then how we create brilliant interventions and solutions that help people to do the best work of their lives and really supercharging transformation. That's what it's all about.
That sounds absolutely brilliant and perfect, absolutely perfect for you. Um, I just want to dig into one area actually to kick us off because my strongest memory of you is your incredible ability to just build really fast rapport and bigger networks and just really bring so much good positive energy to the teams and actually really disperse departments that you work with. I'm really curious to know if this is how you've always been and or if this is something that you've consciously developed over time.
I think it's probably a little from column A and a little from column B. So I think some of it is inherent. I think I am just curious about people. I love building relationships. I love finding common ground and common points. But also, as I sort of progressed in my career, I realised that being able to really deeply understand someone else, there were techniques and shortcuts that I could take to do some of that stuff, which has really helped me and served me well. And I guess coming at it from a place that, everyone is here to hopefully do a good job. I don't think anyone wakes up with bad intent, or I hope not anyone does anyway. So sort of assuming the best in people and just being curious, I think that's really served me well. And it actually, the things that you'd sent through to me in advance of this call, I really got curious about that. I thought, things like vibrational connection and things like that. So I was like, oh, I cannot wait to talk to Alison about this. It sounds amazing.
So thank you for that. And I want to pick up on something you said, which I think is really important, and that is that curiosity, intellectual curiosity, and just curiosity generally about people. Because I think if you come at any relationship like that, you're coming at it in a very open and non-judgmental way. Would you say that's true? Is that something you've done very consciously?
I think open and non-judgmental. I think this sort of ties into the growth mindset and, design thinking practice that I have, more latterly developed into. It's all about just being open to being proved wrong, to having yourself challenged, to having your hypotheses tested. And I think it's the same when it comes to people, sort of going into it with an open mind, being willing to have your mind changed as well. I think that has been something that served me really well in terms of building connections and communicating with people.
Yeah, I love that. So you mentioned vibrational communication. Why don't we start there?
Let's do it.
So I was chatting to somebody in the mental health space actually a couple of days ago about this. And so for me, one of the essentially, if you listen to a song on the radio or on your iPod or whatever, and sometimes the words in the song will just go straight through you, like you feel them in your body. And they will either make the hairs on your arms stand on end, or they'll give you like a little bit of an internal energy fizzle. Is that something that you're okay? So you're nodding.
It
So
resonates, yes.
great. All right. So quite early on, when I was trying to deconstruct and understand how I was able to build really fast rapport and empathy with people, I started to notice the effects of the way I communicate and people respond in my body. Now, that did two things. The first thing it did is it kept me very present in my body, which meant that I wasn't trying to think about how to build rapport. I was just allowing the sound to impact my body and the rapport to build naturally. And so rather than using sometimes really complex things like NLP or matching and mirroring, which I think are really fake, by the way. I can't think of anything worse than if you're sitting there doing that and then, it's just clunky and horrible.
Yeah.
And so I realized that the more present I was in my body and the more switched in I was to my senses, the more I noticed the sound impacting my body. And for that, that meant two things to me. The first thing it meant to me was that I was listening at a much deeper level than I had done previously. And that was good for two reasons. First of all, it meant I could listen to other people better, but it also meant that I could hear my own voice a lot more clearly. And the second thing that I found interesting about that is that, first of all, there was curiosity around it. What's happening? Where's that coming from? This is feeling good. How can I do more of it? And so that led me down a path of trying to understand what was happening and actually just using that as a measure of how well I was connected with somebody. And then what I looked to do was to continue to propagate that wave, but not in a conscious way, because again, it starts to get very fake. And actually, you start engaging your thinking mind, and then the feeling disappears because you're out of your body then. So that was kind of where I got to. So now for me, that's just confirmation, I guess, that I'm listening to myself at a deeper level. I'm listening to others at a deeper level. And we have generated some fascinating energy during the course of the conversation that is taking us to areas that are, like you said earlier, inspiring, fascinating. You get these light bulb moments from them. So does that make sense?
It really does. It really resonates. And, everything is energy, right? Everything is energy. And that's why I was so curious and inspired when I was reading through the things that you sent to me. I was like, I have to find out more about this because I really do believe everything's energy. And, it's physics. It is. Energy doesn't go away. Energy always exists. And it's just that transfer of energy. And I really hear what you're saying there around paying attention to how that feels allows you to be more present, it grounds you, listening more to what that person is saying. So yeah, absolutely, really, really does resonate. And I think on the whole, I'm really curious about this connection piece that you mentioned. I know you talk a little bit about spirituality as well, in what you're doing. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, around how spirituality comes into this. It's not something you hear a lot of in the corporate world, right? It's not something that people naturally go to, I think.
So I think it's really interesting because having had this conversation now with a number of people in really senior L&D positions, everyone has been saying to me, if you ever do something like intuitive leadership, or if you're ever looking to bring spiritual intelligence into the workplace, I'm interested, hit me up. And so on one hand, I'm aware that there is a little bit more curiosity around it. On the other hand, I'm very conscious that there is a lot of bias and a lot of old thinking built around it. So I'm really keen to ensure that we don't go down the latter route and that we are very firmly rooted in the present and future when it comes to this kind of thing. So I think for me, to put it really simply, connection for me is when you are speaking to somebody core to core. You are speaking to their core self. You're not speaking to everything that's around it. And when you speak to somebody at that level, it is far easier to connect, because what you're not doing is dipping into your thinking, your biases, your conditioning, your assumptions, be they conscious or not. You are simply connecting at that most fundamental human level that everybody can resonate with. And I have found that the most effective way to communicate across the board. Now, in order to, in my experience, in order to do that, I have to have explored the core of who I am. I have to consciously know who and what that is. And I have done that. And in fact, it's something that I do on one-to-ones with people. I take them down into their core self. Some people call it enlightenment. I don't like that word. All I can say to you is that when you reach the core of yourself, you will never ever have to go around the cycle of having to answer life's biggest questions, because they become known and they do not need to be revisited. Now, for me, that was my spiritual path, if you like. I think that everyone has slightly different needs depending on where they are in their life, and slightly different questions. But once you have all your own questions answered, you're then able to seamlessly integrate whatever spirituality means to you, and to me it's non-religious, into your day-to-day life and put it into practice. Does that make sense at
And
all?
it does make a lot of sense. And how is this connected? I think I can see the connection, but talk to me a little bit about vision and values led. I think that sort of ties to what you're saying about knowing yourself, I think, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your perspective on that element of it.
So that to me is actually just a very slightly separate thing, because when you're connecting at the core of somebody, those things disappear. Literally everything around that person disappears, and you quickly are able to explore topics, even if you are out of alignment in terms of your vision and your perspective on life. And in doing that, you get a unique insight into a topic area that you would never have had you only spoken to people who are in alignment.
Nice. And is this the link then to a celebration of diversity? I think is how I've seen you describe it. So I love the web you're weaving around the different topics and how they interconnect. Each one is leading me to the next, if you like.
Yeah. So diversity of thinking is critical to me, because otherwise we operate in a vacuum, and that's unhealthy. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I've experienced that. And I also experienced it during the time that I was working alongside you at Legal & General. I was aware that I was operating in a bit of an echo chamber, and I knew that I had to break out of that for my own health, my well-being, my intellectual stimulation. And but that aside, everyone, I believe, has an interesting perspective to share. I always work on the assumption that you never know who you're talking to. And people do drop these incredible bangers, as we know, from people like Paul and, who just come out of the blue, and you think, that is incredible. But had you put any filters, had you overlaid those as a condition of connection, then to me, you're missing out a big part, not just diversity of thinking, but of the connection process itself.
It's fascinating, and I think you're so right. I think it really resonates with me, actually, what you're saying about breaking out of that echo chamber. And I think a really different way of looking at work, of looking at life, of looking at people and human relationships. I genuinely think the world is ready for it, right? It's what we've always done hasn't really worked, so let's do something different. Let's try this. When you talk about the work that you're doing, you reference the number of elements. How do you recommend someone sort of get started with this kind of stuff? Do you work through each element in sequence? Is it part of a broader program? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Gemma. So that's a great question. Before people come on my course, there are just a few really key things that need to be in place. So first of all, they have to be at a point where they want to develop themselves and they have started along that journey, that personal development, that self-awareness journey, and they have some internal structures which are there to support them. Um, the next thing is they need to have that curiosity that you spoke about at the beginning, and they need to be able to approach the topic areas with an open mind. So as long as those things are in place and they will use what we're talking about for good, and to me that's a given, but it's just worth mentioning, then we start along the path. Now, when I've run these courses in the past, how I have delivered each session has very much depended on the group needs. So it's completely customized to the group that I'm working with. And generally, I found that the right people come together and they all kind of need the same thing and move along in a very similar way. There are certain things that I ask people not to do on the course. I ask them not to overthink, and to learn to connect, without the interference of their thinking mind. They can then put that back in afterwards, but in a practice environment, it's absolutely key to have the courage, and the self-belief to communicate with people and meet them where they are. So that again references your D&I, that diversity of thinking. So in a short answer is I start and meet people where they're at. And I'm just mindful of the time, so we'll just finish off in a second. But generally, they have to have those things in place. And then I would recommend that people start off with listening to themselves, listening to others, deepening their practice. And then as the next natural stage to that would be listening to their intuition. So being able to understand how to isolate that from their imagination and hear it and act on it.
Amazing. Can I ask you one final question?
You can.
What role has the adventure that you're on currently played in developing this?
I'm not sure, Gemma. I think I was talking to somebody about this yesterday and today. There is a sense that when you draw a line in the sand in your life, no matter where you are, whether it's a quarter or a half life, change, but you know that that line has been drawn and there is no going back. You never know exactly where the path will take you. But to me, my intention has always been to relaunch these because they're who I am. And they're the way I express myself in the world and how I like to contribute. So in other words, they're me operating at my best. So I've always known that the next step as I crossed that line was to birth these courses. I didn't know how that would come about or when. So this was a purely strategic, commercial and logistical decision for me. If you're going to start a business, you go where your overheads are the lowest to give you the time that you need and the runway necessary to launch a new business and bring a product to market.
Nice.
I'm going to let you go.
Yeah.
Conscious of time.
Brilliant.
I'll just switch the recording off. But it's been lovely having you with me today. I've loved every minute. Bear with me a sec.
So lovely to catch